Good evening. It's now 6 p.m. and the February 18th meeting of the Dublin San Ramon Services District Board of Directors is called to order. Please join me in the pledge to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Director Johnson?
Here.
Director Von Heater-Leopold?
Here.
Director Govinda Rao?
Here.
Vice President Halkett?
I'm here.
President Goel?
Present. Thank you. And now we'll move on to any special announcements or activities.
No special announcements this evening.
Thank you. Moving into public comment. At this time, those in the audience are encouraged to address the board on any items of interest that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and not already included on tonight's agenda. Comments should not exceed 5 minutes. Are there any speaker cards from the members of the public? Thank you. All right, agenda management.
No recommended changes.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, consent calendar. Matters listed under this item are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless requested by a member of the board or the public prior to the time the board votes on the motion to adopt. Is there a motion to approve the items underneath the consent?
I just have a comment. On 7B, one thing we may want to look at for the board to consider, so it says the general managers, and I know we authorized this earlier, the general manager is authorized to create a project from a CIP program up to a maximum of $175,000. One thing we may want to consider as a board is that's a one-time thing, but is there a max, like an accumulative thing over a certain period of time? And just want to throw that out to the board to see, is that something do we want to have as a future discussion?
I think let's pull that item and then bring it back as a discussion, as an independent item, so we can actually discuss it. Is that how we need to do this?
If there's to be discussion and not just a comment, yes, yeah, I think the board should pull that item and act on it separately.
What's being requested?
I'm actually asking just for, I'm commenting on this as something we can just bring up in a future meeting, and that's really what I'm looking at for today.
Okay.
But if we want to discuss it today, we can.
It's on the agenda. You could pull it and you can take a separate discussion before we actually take a motion to approve. Or if you'd like to bring it up under other topics to add on, you can do it there.
Yeah, we won't see this again for 4 years, right?
No, so that's why.
Okay. So we should pull it then? I'm sorry, you were going to say.
Well, the item before the board this evening is the quarterly financial report for acceptance. I believe your question is related to the budget accountability policy,
Right.
which provides for the general manager to create a project out of a program up to a maximum of $175,000. And perhaps if this is appropriate, what I could do is clarify that the board sets the program limits and budget limits when they adopt the capital budget. So there is a cumulative limit that's already set by the board. And that within those programs, the general manager is authorized to create projects up to 175 within the program budget that the board has already approved.
Do we know what the cumulative number is?
We do. It is in the budget that comes before the board
Okay.
for approval. And it will come, like, for example, the 26-27 proposed upcoming budget will come before the board in May for review and then June for consideration of adoption.
And I'm fine to discuss it, in May, June, whenever it does come up. Because I know you were thinking it may come up in 4 years, but excuse me. But I think it would be perfectly fine.
So
fine to do that.
To bring order to this again. A comment is fine. If we want to discuss it, we can pull it. Do you want to have it pulled?
Sure. Let's pull it then.
Okay. All right. So would you like
So
to make...
I'll make a motion to approve on the consent calendars items 7A and 7C.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you. So we have a motion for item 7A and 7C. Item 7B is being pulled for discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those saying nay. Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. Back to item 7B. The item topic is accept regular and reoccurring reports, current quarterly financial report, and capital projects created for programs. Director Govinda Rao.
So it was just, again, going back to my comment about the statement here about the general manager being authorized, and I know we approved that, create a project from a CIP program up to a maximum of 175,000. So what I was just wanted to discuss is, do we want to, and it sounds like there is a cumulative amount, and maybe we can just get clarification, what is that cumulative amount before our meeting that we have to discuss our budget, the 26-20, the upcoming budget in May or June. And that's all I have.
We can do that. And one other thought might be staff could look at the table that we provide on projects created out of program and perhaps add a column to show what the program limit is. So that might also add some transparency and
Great.
some information for the board.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So let me just maybe ask the question. There's a link inside of the staff memo, if I read it correctly, that goes to policy number P400-24-2. And then in the section project created from programs, over there it says the max.
Correct.
Okay.
So just again, a point of clarification. We had the flood. We declared an emergency. And we're also talking about that tonight as well. And there is the power for the executive director to basically authorize things without board approval. So is there a limit on that? And is there a conflict based on capital versus operating expenses? I guess, because we do have other policies where there is some discretion around finances.
So are you basically saying when we bring this item, you want to make sure that there's some consistency and that there is no...
Well, it sounds like there is a power that we're giving our general manager. When we declare a state of emergency, that power exists.
Right.
When we do capital projects, apparently that power exists. And I'm sure there's just general operating change orders, et cetera, where that power exists. So maybe there's just an opportunity to make sure that we're consistent in what that level is. Because I
For each
thought
of
it was
those
more
items.
than 175,000.
Is they are different authorities. When there's an emergency, the general manager declares an emergency and the board ratifies that emergency within 10 days. And I think Michelle Gallardo can further expand on this, but that then authorizes the general manager to expend funds to respond to that emergency. And that's separate and distinct from the funding we're talking about for creating projects out of programs that derive from the capital improvement program projects.
So it probably would be good to understand for each of these different scenarios is kind of what I'm hearing.
Okay, so let's kind of bring
Okay.
two things back to bay here. One is the item 7B.
Right.
And the one to revisit the authority on that. Your item is an additional request potentially to make sure that there is no disconnect and there's consistency. So we can have that mentioned as an additional item to come back for the future.
Or it might come up tonight in the discussion with the emergency.
Okay. So we'll wait till the end of the
Yeah.
meeting to bring it back. And then item 7B, is there any other discussion? Any other requests? If not, may I have a motion to approve?
Also move.
One second.
Okay, I have a motion by Director Von Heater Leopold and a second by Director Govinda Rao. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 8. Item 8A, accept fiscal year 2024 annual report on rate stabilization fund reserves and approve transfer from the water rate stabilization fund 605 to the water operations fund 600. Staff.
And Spray, Finance Director, will introduce his staff who will review the item for the board.
There we go. Good evening, President Goel and members of the board. So tonight we have our finance supervisor, Christine Chen, who is giving a presentation on the rate stabilization fund calculation and analysis and the amount transferred, if any, that will be relative to the target versus the actual dollar levels of each one of the funds on a single basis and on a combined basis. So, Christine.
Good evening, President Goel and member of the board. I'm Christine Chan, the finance supervisor at the district. I'm here to present the Rate Stabilization Fund Reserve Annual Report for the fiscal year 2024. As required by the Financial Reserve Policy, which established fund reserve guidance, expressed in month of working capital for each of the district's 3 enterprises: local wastewater collection, regional wastewater treatment, and water. The Financial Reserve Policy and RSF report outline the calculation used to determine when funds should be transferred between the Operation Fund and Rate Stabilization Fund to ensure adequate funding and financial stability. If the combined working capital of the operations and Rate Stabilization Fund is greater than the policy maximum, staff makes recommendation on how the funds should be used. Based on the audit financial statement for the fiscal year 2024, the working capital for the local and regional wastewater operation fund are between target and maximum reserve level. Therefore, no transfer is recommended for the local wastewater collection and regional wastewater treatment enterprise. The ending working capital for the water operation fund, however, is below target level of 4 months. In accordance with the Financial Reserve Policy, staff recommend a transfer of $4,050,098, which is 1/4 of the water RSF fund balance to the water operation fund to bring the fund above the minimum requirement. And the calculation for the $4 million is at the end of the staff report. This concludes my report, and I'm available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Bring it to the board for any questions. Seeing none, do I have a motion? Got a motion by Director Govinda Rao and a second by Director Vanhita Leopold. Just checking for any public comment. Seeing none, we'll go in for the vote. For all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? The motion carries unanimous. Moving on to item 8B, receive an update on the Emergency Preparedness and Response Program. Staff.
Michelle Gallardo, Administrative Services Director, will present this item to the board.
Good evening, President Goel, members of the board. This evening, I'll be presenting an update for you on our Emergency Preparedness and Response Program. I am bringing this update a couple years ago. I believe I gave you this update. Hopefully the lights don't go on us this time, if you recall last time. I've also asked our Environmental Health and Safety Program Administrator, Dave Peters, to be here with us. He has great experience in this area, and so we thought it would be great for him to join us. So this evening, I will be covering the priorities, the plans, and mutual aid agreements we have in place. We'll be talking about our emergency supplies and contracts in place. We are also going to cover communications and our interagency coordination efforts. We'll discuss where we're at with staff training and exercises. And then we also wanted to talk a little bit about wildfire preparedness, since this is a current event, as we all know, and of interest to our community, and then our next steps. We do have, as you know, a strategic plan goal to enhance our ability to respond to emergencies and to maintain business continuity, and this guides our program. We also follow the preparedness cycle, which is the philosophy of how you do an emergency response program. This is the FEMA preparedness cycle that you see here, this chart. Idea here is, to plan and to prepare building your equipment and organizing your supplies, and then to train your staff on use of the equipment and responding and following the plans in place, running exercises to see how those training efforts are working, and then evaluate how well that went and put that into place again. And it's a cycle we go through. With the next section of slides, I'm going to just cover briefly for you our priorities, the plans we have in place, and agreements we have in place. So during the planning phase, we did outline in the policy that you just approved this evening, that's continued here for many years, our main priorities, which is number one, to protect human life and health. Our second priority is to protect property. And our third is to protect the environment while always protecting the safety of our workforce. Before I move on to this, I just wanted to mention, and I know this came up earlier, with regard to our policy does provide that the board is given authority to the general manager as the emergency manager to respond to emergencies. And a section of that policy does cover being able to spend money or use district funds in the case of an emergency. And we do follow a procedure in our purchasing procedures for contracting that we may need to bypass certain contract requirements in order to execute contracts, but it is a requirement that we bring that back to the board within 10 days for justification and approval as to why we would do that as part of the public contract code we follow and refer to in this case. So just wanted to make mention of that. We also, in our program, in our emergency response program, we follow the guidelines of the federal NIMS, National Incident Management System, and the state Standardized Emergency Management System process. We recognize that there are essentially 5 levels of response. So there's a statewide or regional level. It's the highest level in our state of response. Then it goes down to our operational area. For us, that's Alameda County Office of Emergency Services. And then down through the cities, and then a field response would be DSRSD, essentially. And we wanted to just briefly cover this as well in terms of these response levels, because it does factor in terms of when we are building exercises and the types of exercising and trainings we're doing, what kinds of emergencies we're responding to and the scale of those. Typically, at a level 4 field response, these are your water line breaks and your, low, impact to customers type incidents that we can respond to. They go up from there. So a local government, a level 3, would maybe involve local jurisdictions like the city or JPA partners. And then moving up from there, the operational area, which would be a level 2. This is a wider scale incident, right? This is something like it's affecting several cities or a major intersection, and the county is required in order to coordinate response. Emergency response personnel are most likely involved in this level of an incident, and we're coordinating with Office of Emergency Services at the county level. And then, of course, a level 1, a state and regional incident, that is a wide-scale emergency. And so wanted to kind of break down sort of what you might expect in terms of this, the different kinds of incidents we encounter. We also do have quite a few emergency response plans. We show you here in this list the various plans and their state of most recent update. We do have the Illness and Injury Prevention Program kind of on our list as our next area to update. This plan really is the overreaching program for all of our district safety programs and follows the California state regulations pretty close. It hasn't changed much in the last few years, but we do want to update to make sure it's applicable to our district and our staff, the way we're organized. We also review and update our emergency response plan as things change. So we I think it was last year, we updated our EOC structure and who's assigned to cover EOC functions, and that gets updated regularly. So that's part of our emergency response plan, and we make updates to those, as well as a variety of other hazard plans. We just last year coordinated with the cities of Dublin, Livermore, and Pleasanton on our hazard mitigation plan and updated that, and that's good for 5 years, and a variety of other required plans. We also have several mutual aid agreements in place. We are part of the CalWARN system, which is a mutual aid support network promoting emergency preparedness and disaster response and mutual aid for public and private water and wastewater utilities. We also have an established Tri-Valley Intergovernmental Reciprocal Services Master Agreement we could draw on at any time if we needed to coordinate for something beyond what we already have in place for mutual aid agreements, and then several other mutual aid agreements in place with local cities.
Michelle, before you move on,
Sure.
I noticed the city of San Ramon isn't listed in the mutual aid agreements. Is that a gap, or is it just didn't make the list?
I'm not sure why we don't, and I'm not sure what we might need one for if we did. So it would be something I'd need to follow up and look into. We do have 4 emergency intertie agreements: East Bay Mud, Pleasanton, Livermore, and Zone 7. Pictured here is the most recent setup of the intertie between East Bay Mud and DSRSD. And then to the right is a picture showing the storage of those supplies, and they are color-coded so they know which one goes with which. And this is how we make sure and maintain they are ready to go in case of an emergency. Our next section here to cover is emergency supplies and contracts. We do have a variety of supplies. First aid, we get an update regularly. A vendor comes and replaces them and keeps them updated. We have AEDs in our facilities. We also have emergency food, water, and shelter. We just, a couple years ago, I think, Dave, we went out and did an update to the container out of the wastewater treatment plant of supplies and water, and we'll be doing the same in the field operations and district office facilities. We have spill kits, we have spare parts. We do have 8 backup generators, which the maintenance and operations staff keep track of where they're located at any time. They have a little tracking board for that, and diesel gas supplies. We have standby contractor support. We have 3 on-call repair contractors. They provide service response within 4 hours, and they are available 24/7 on weekends and holidays. With regard to our gasoline contracts and supplies, we have 1 vendor on contract, and then we have a line of credit with another contractor for emergency supplies as needed. We do also have access to gasoline at the Alameda County Courtyard over near the Office of Emergency Services there. And then we also do store gasoline, about 1,000 gallons at the treatment plant of unleaded gasoline there. The fleet staff, they can move up to 100 gallons to remote sites as needed of gasoline. Next section I'll be covering is on communications and interagency coordination. We do coordinate with a number of associations and consortiums. We do have a seat at the Office of Emergency Services at the County EOC, which is our area center. We also are part of the Emergency Managers Association. That group meets monthly, and they cover a variety of topics. They usually have host speakers. Someone in the group will come and talk about emergency response or bring some resources for the group to learn about in the area to bring everyone in awareness. And they've been doing a lot of work and discussion about how to better coordinate and use their VOCHI system, which is their mutual aid system, their online system. Also, a newly forming group and established group is the Tri-Valley Emergency Management Consortium. This is Tri-Valley cities and special districts, particularly just here. So Pleasanton, Livermore, and a few special districts, I believe, here just in the Tri-Valley. And they are trying to get that group going and coordinating a little bit more often in terms of response in this area of the county. And of course, we have our PG&E portal, and we get push messages and communications from the portal when there are power shutoff notices and impacts to customers. We also have our own communications tools. We are part of the GET system. This is the Government Emergency Telecommunications Service, and it allows us to bypass the typical lines of communication when there's an emergency. So a lot of times in a big emergency, you can't make a phone call using a landline. It makes it really difficult, but the GET system will let you bypass that traffic and put emergency calls in. We've had that service for a long time here, and it is assigned to a variety of staff around the agency to have the GETS access. We also do have P25 radios through the East Bay Regional Communications System Authority. The authority is managed. It's a JPA out of the sheriff's office, and they provide the support to update our radios, and we coordinate the radios through them, and we can use them to communicate with each other and also with other agencies. And then the VOCHI system is the online county specific mutual aid coordination system. It is managed primarily through OES, and then all of the participating agencies have access to log in and view incidents and get updates as they occur, or submit mutual aid requests and track them there online. And we have several folks here who have access to the VOCHI system.
Before you go on, again, sort of a similar question before. If things Alameda County, we do service Contra Costa County. 2 of your board members live in Contra Costa County. Is it the same?
So I've looked up to see if Contra Costa County has Emergency Managers Association, and I have not been able to find one. They, I believe, they have an Office of Emergency Services, but they don't meet and coordinate quite the same way. That is something I've continued to look into, and I know Dave has as well. We've been trying to push into Contra Costa to see if there's the same level of coordination and efforts there that Alameda County has.
Okay, I would like to have that as a continued action item.
No problem.
We need to at least understand what it is. Thanks.
And, you know, to add to that, maybe, again, if we discuss with the city of San Ramon, I mean, they may also know of how, I mean, they may have those connections already. So that might be a good start to start with them.
Very good. Thank you. So with regard to our own communication system, we have a fiber optic and a Wi-Fi network system. We did some upgrades to. We have our own wide area network system. Fiber is the primary interconnection between all 3 locations, and the radio is the backup for that. Our SCADA is a mix of fiber and radio links, and all of our field locations are Wi-Fi enabled. This allows us to have communication in all of our areas in the case of emergency, and continued coordination in case of. And then we did complete a major project consisting of the ISP redundancy. So we're in good shape on our internal ability to communicate. With regard to staff training and exercises, we are disaster service workers under the government code. Before entering the duties of public employment, employees are asked to subscribe to an oath set forth in the California Constitution, declaring them disaster service workers in the time that we may need them, and they are provided training upon appointment to their position here, letting them know what the expectations of disaster service workers would be. We also require that all staff complete the IS 100 and IS 700 introduction to ICS and NIMS trainings. And at this point in time, 100% of the staff have completed that training. In 24 and 25, we did complete a number of trainings and exercises. We've conducted our emergency evacuation drills at our main facilities. We've tested our intercom system. We conduct the Great Shakeout in October every year, and it's another opportunity for us to test evacuations. And this last year, we tested our new InformaCast push communication system during that same time. We also participated in a joint emergency exercise with the City of Dublin in December of 23. And then following that in March of 24, we had a 3-day training hosted by state trainers come out and provide ICS 300 training for our EOC staff, which was well received by staff. And I think it was very good training that we'd like to continue maybe doing maybe every other year. Also, Cal Water annual EOC training exercise. Dan Gill participated in that this past summer. And just as a point, I mentioned InformaCast. InformaCast is an app that we are using that in the case of an emergency, we can push a message out that as long as the staff have the app loaded on their phone, we can push the message and it'll pop up a message on their phones. It's a quick way of getting information to people. We've obviously used emails and phone calls and radios, but this is just another layer. And so we rolled that out and tested it last fall, and we continue to build and roll that out. Planned for fiscal year 26 and 27, we're going to continue our evacuation drill practices and our Great Shakeout in the fall. We'll be continuing EOC training and exercises, as well as VOC training for specific staff. We want to also practice using our P25 radios and conduct checks and tests on a regular basis. Also, again, the InformaCast testing and exercises, so staff get comfortable and familiar with those alerts as they are pushed in the time of an emergency. We also hope to conduct a tabletop exercise with our EOC staff in the fall this year, and then continue our personal emergency preparedness training. This is something we also conduct every other year, and we also do messaging during National Emergency Response Month, which is in September of each year. And then just to, again, wanted to make sure that we had a brief update for you on the wildfire preparedness and cover some of the areas where we are preparing and giving a little bit of information on this for the community. Our operations and maintenance, they do coordinate with the fire departments for inspections of our vegetation management. They have contracts in place for mowing and weed abatement in the respective areas. They also, with the water distribution preventative maintenance system, they inspect and operate the fire hydrants to verify full functionality. They're flushing the potable dead-end pipes to remove sediment and improve water quality. And they exercise the valves to be sure that they're ready to work in an emergency. We also prepare during extreme heat and PSPS preparedness. We maintain storage volume to meet the customer demands and the fire season. We do monitor the weather conditions during that time and make sure we're going to have frequent communication with our water supplier, Zone 7, in case of emergency repair coordination. Wanted to just show as an example, a few years ago, back in August of 22, there was a fire in the Eden Canyon Schaefer Ranch area, and these are pictures from that incident. It was a vegetation fire, and it was in DSRSD's Zone 4 area. DSRSD staff were dispatched to the scene to help in response. And just to go back, and we were talking about response levels, that particular incident did raise to a local government level 3 response because it included cities of Dublin, local fire and police, as well as DSRSD, all to coordinate in response to this incident. The fire department dispatch contacted DSRSD, our on-call operator. We worked to determine the pressure zone that the fire was located in and turn on the pumps to assist the firefighters in their response. The minimum storage at any given time is approximately 50% of full capacity for emergency purposes. The pump stations work to pump the water to the reservoir, so we would make sure that we have the standby generators, backup generators in case there are power outages to help in that response if necessary. So our next steps in our program administration, our preparedness activities, we are still planning to engage consulting services to help us out, to update our action plans. We have a variety of action plans for a variety of different situations. We want to keep those updated, and consulting support can help us with that. We continue staff training and exercises and seek help of experts in this area to do that, as well as EOC staff training. We want to continue to optimize our emergency supplies and our inventory. So that's a focus for our future program updates. We also want to maintain our emergency contracts and procurement forms and keep those updated and ready to go in the case we need to activate them. We want to develop and leverage our preparedness efforts through our interagency coordination and continue partnership and being involved in those associations and coordination groups. And then we also, we do plan to update the board guidelines for emergency response procedures. This is an area we understand is of interest to the board, and we do feel that would be a good update to add to that section of the board guidelines. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Excellent presentation and a great recap. I think it's really addressing a lot of our comments and feedback that we've had over my tenure here, actually. So thank you for that. Let's go ahead and open it up to the board for any comments and questions. We'll start on my left.
Michelle, nice job with the presentation. Just a couple of things, and most of them are comments. When you talk about the different written emergency response plans, and I like how you broke it up into those different columns, it may be nice to add another column that just says like the frequency when they need to be updated. So if it's every 3 years, every 5 years, just as another column. So that's just a suggestion to the staff. The other thing too is on the stuff with, for example, we talk about the first aid supplies and the automated AEDs, automated external defibrillators, just also a little bit on the frequency of when those are updated. So supplies, and then when how often they're checked, and you know, and I'm sure you keep all the logs for that. So, but it would just be probably good to outline that a little bit more in detail. And then kind of going back to that question that Anne Marie had raised too, is, you know, San Ramon also has a joint partnership, you know, and a great EOC center that they built state of the art between the police and fire. So maybe, you know, kind of behoove us to reach out to them, just to, you know, to partner with them and figure out how we can as we look at the different partnerships there, how we can, mutually work with them. So those are just some comments. But nice job with the presentation. Thank you for going over this.
I had a quick question with regards to, I think, the last slide you had. You talked about emergency supplies. I was curious if that included food and water for staff, and if so, how much, how long, and where it was. Because I know from experience that gets, just speaking about updating it, gets expensive. It tends to just go to waste. I was just curious as to what our barometer is on that.
Sorry, thank you for your question. Yes, so we do have on our plans going around and making sure that our stash, our cash is updated. One funny kind of story I'll share is when we did go out to the wastewater treatment plant, the container, it had a lot of supplies out there. We had done a lot of this work maybe 10 years ago. And maybe a little longer than that. So we went in there and looked at, what's the quality of the food and the water. And so we decided to make sure to taste it, a cracker, just to kind of see if it was, still viable. In the MRE containers, and they were actually edible, but they were done, and so they needed to be replaced. So we made updates to that. We refreshed the water, and yes, we made sure that that container was updated and put on a schedule for regular updates. We'll be doing the same thing with the district office and the field operations locations for their supplies.
We got enough box. I was just curious as to how you made that decision and what it is.
So we did some preparations, and I think Dave and I worked on some recommendations. And if you don't mind, he can come up and probably speak to that a little better than I can, because it's been a couple years ago and we did this work. Dave, would you like to?
So Steve, were you the guinea pig for the cracker?
No.
Members of the board.
Did you taste the cracker?
Actually, it was the ham product out of the district office.
First-hand knowledge.
The MREs, yes.
Yeah.
Basically, you test them out, and if they're good, you put them away, and then if the crackers are bad, toss them, because everything else is bad. But what we based our the amount that we keep is, we went to each of the divisions or departments and said, how many people are you going to have on scene, or how many people do you expect to have on scene? And then we planned for 5 days. So it's not going to be hotel living. It's going to be camping, more or less. We have cots, we have sleeping bags, we have hygiene kits, toiletries, and bare minimums. The MREs, we just purchased those. Those are usually good in cases for about 5 years. They can go longer, but I don't want to trust them past that. So we plan to replace those that often. As regards to the first aid questions, they're checked monthly, and they come out and add any supplies that are needed, and they sign off on the sticker on the outside of the container. AEDs are checked monthly by staff that are from the safety committee, and they document that into Target Solutions. The batteries are good for like 5 years, and the pads are good for like 2 or 3. So those are replaced regularly as well.
I appreciate that risk assessment. Appreciate the information too. Thank you.
Is that it?
That's all I have.
Director Von Heater Leopold, any questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you. Very concise, very thorough. I mean, there's always going to be something more that we're going to be able to find, but I think. Well, hopefully we don't find out in an emergency, but what I would say is, we're on the path to doing things correctly, right? We've got awareness, we've got a centralized place, and one thing I learned at one of the organizations that I was at is keep on training, testing, and checking. Can't say enough about it, because I think if you really think about to the fundamentals of anything, it's always about practice, practice, practice. It's got to become second nature. And so I know we're striving, right, to get to that point. But from my side, that would be one encouragement is to try to increase the repetitiveness. You know, the other thing we had done in this other organization I was with was to embody it as being part of the practice and making sure staff understood it. And I'll be honest with you, when I first got to that organization, I was like, why are we doing this? And this was a tailboard for every single meeting, down to the point where who was going to go to the curbside for when 911's called? Who's going to protect a certain area if a certain incident was to happen? Who's going to go grab the AED? And what ended up happening is it becomes second nature. It takes about 2 minutes at the beginning of every meeting. And now what happens is personnel inside the office and personnel out in the field, just like their standard tailboards before any major construction or actions that they're taken, it becomes part of their cycle. So from my side, strive, but let's get it right. And thank you.
Can you go back just before we, I know this is an information topic, we don't have a motion, but can you go back to your plans for the coming year? And let's look at those drills real fast.
Yep.
Because one thing we had talked about was active shooter.
Yep.
And wanting to make sure that that was somehow on the radar for a potential drill.
Yep.
So I didn't know when you talked about, I know you did the Great American Shakeout and some other things on the list. I didn't necessarily see that type of activity, so just a recommendation.
Yeah, I think tied to that normally comes situational awareness. But staff, any feedback as to maybe when that may be coming forward?
It's on my radar. In terms of the time frame, I'm not exactly sure yet. But
Maybe just
yep.
provide that insight in the GM update.
I'd just like to add some information. I know when I was with the city and we were doing the mutual aid contracts, one of the problems that there are with trying to do something with San Ramon is that in one of those levels of emergency, the county sheriff becomes God and takes over everything. And that presented a hurdle with trying to do things mutually with San Ramon. So maybe that's still the case, but they're going to find out exactly why. But that's part of why we couldn't, as a city in those days, do mutual aid with San Ramon.
I'm sure that they could use our generators, though. And if
True.
there's a fire, I think we should just understand if their communication system is
Right.
the same, and if it's on the same network, great. If it's not, then just to be aware of how you can actually reach people in the event of a fire, that type of thing. So just upping our awareness. But decisions fall out of that, I'd take it with a grain of salt.
And just as a reminder, there was a lot of government action from learned lessons, and that's what created these broadcast radios shared across different entities, for instance. So that may be historically what was there, and I think it's prudent for staff to confirm and maybe even provide us a report back on what's been found out at a later time. So that it sounds like the board would be satisfied to hear back on the findings. All right. That was a non-action item. Just confirming no members in the public have any comments, questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on to item 9, reports. 9A, board items. We'll go in sequence. So the first portion is any JPA meetings. I'm seeing none. Thank you again for your service, sir. Item 9A2, submittal written reports, days of service.
I have one day of service. Last week was the Alameda County Special Districts Board meeting. We got a legislative update from Dane. It's interesting, as everybody's noticing, we're having less trouble dealing with California and more trouble dealing with the feds. So things like the flushable wipes and issues are sort of getting stalled, but thank heaven our people who work as Yes,
Vargas?
our advocates um, don't stop with no. They continue to work because the electeds know that some of these things are major problems. The other issue was our next official meeting is March 13th with the dinner meeting. And if anybody hasn't given their RSVP, please make sure at this moment we only have 45, which may sound okay, but normally we get 80, and the price went from 4,000 to 7,000 this year for dinner. So we definitely need all 80. So we don't use up our whole budget paying for dinner. um, that was mainly it. There is now an official National Special Districts organization. They've got their 501c. I think it's a 6. Dane wasn't sure, but it's 501c6 because it's a political organization. But we finally have a national organization that acknowledges the fact that there are special districts in addition to cities and counties. And let's see, our next board meeting is April 9th. We went over some of the budget. We haven't gotten in a lot of dues yet. I'm not exactly thrilled with the way we're doing that this year, but I'm trying to comply. Sending everything email, I don't think works because you only have one contact per agency, and if that person's gone or doesn't answer, you have no way of knowing. So anyway, that's my gripe about the way we do the dues billing. But that's it.
Thank you. Any others? None? Okay, moving on to 9A3. Any requests for new agenda items? I know we talked about one, but we did hear a staff memo. Does anything need to come back? Everyone satisfied? All right. Moving on to 9B, staff reports.
The LAVMA board meeting, 6 p.m. tomorrow evening here in the boardroom, and the closed sessions this evening will be in the GM conference room.
Okay. And with that, I think we're going to adjourn to closed session. And please remember to put your mics on mute. Thank you. The board is back in open session. The closed session has concluded. There was no reportable action taken in closed session. Next item, adjournment. The meeting is adjourned at 9:02 p.m. Have a good evening.